Today we're going to re-examine the search window. And I want to use some real world examples, not some obtuse stuff. I want to do some things that you guys will really use. So we'll talk about different ways to use the search. And when I mean search, we'll talk about it from the edit menu here at the bottom. So we're going to get into that today. And I'm going to give you guys my search files. So no sweat, no need to worry about wrestling through that or taking screenshots or notes. I mean, certainly take your notes as you will, but I'm going to share all of the searches that I've created today with you guys. And I'm going to create the searches on the fly, I've decided. That's as opposed to just pulling up the ones I've already saved. I want you guys to see the process. The search window, it's one of those windows, even when I revisit it every month or so, I'm like, you just got to take a minute to get in there and sort of wrap your head around it. So let's do it. So I've got a project here, and this was something I used for film scoring. And this is interesting, before sort of combined instrument tracks, multi-timbral stuff. And you can see in this, there's quite a bit going on. This is a good example because it has audio and MIDI and sound bites and muted information and markers. And if you guys look right at the top, you see here that I'm looking at bars and beats and ticks. And look at my time code. This is a film cue. And so this references, of course, the time code, the start of the chunk. And so if I go into the movie window, Shift V, you can see that it matches. If I bring this out here, first frame of this picture, this is a cue that I did for a Deep Space Nine documentary. If I look at the very, very beginning, let's just see here, where are we? 4/16/45/06. So I've got it matched here, ready to go. So my bar 1 equals the start of the film. And so that's a cue that ended up going into that particular project. So it'll be good, though, to use as an example for this. So it's interesting when you're talking about searching. In a way, I want you guys to think about the view filter. The view filter is similar. They're like similar animals in a way. It's a question of what do you want to see in your project? So that's what today is all about. So let's look at that. What's the view filter versus searching? And how do those sort of cross over each other? And when would you use one over the other? Well, let's just look at the view filter for a minute. And you guys know under view, we go into filter, Command F on a Mac. And you guys know it's a question of seeing everything in the project by default, and then being able to hide things you don't want to see or isolate things by showing them by themselves. So let's just do something really simple in a way, which is let's just look at all the notes. So we'll do that. We'll just clear. One way I like to use the view filter is I just say, take everybody out, clear everybody out and say notes. And I want to look at on velocities, and I want to look at normal display. And it's interesting. What I have to do is sort of tickle it for a second for it to show the notes. I click on automation and controllers. Now I'm just seeing the notes. Now, of course, I can highlight the notes in my selection. Now that they're visible, of course, I can highlight them, delete them, transpose them, change their velocity. But when it comes to the view filter, when I'm dealing with notes, I'm dealing with basically the notes in their entirety, right? It's different with search. Search will let me actually go in and pick the notes based on a huge range. I want to look at the notes of a certain velocity. I want to look at the notes in a certain range. So it's different. Search is deeper. View filter works, though, to look at the raw data itself, but I can't differentiate where the notes are based on the parameters in the view filter. So that's sort of a big distinction right off the bat, but that comes in handy. So how would I really use the view filter for this project? And I do want to actually use it and show you guys. So let's just set it back here to all. So everything's showing in my project. And there is some pitch data that I don't want, some pitch bend data. So all I'd have to do in this window is simply hold Option and click on pitch bend. There it is. And do I want to get rid of it? I mean, I could certainly just select all, delete it. And I go back to Command F, and I said, that's perfect. I got rid of that. That worked out really well. Let's get rid of some controller 64 messages. Let's say, as you were playing in a piano part, you ended up cleaning up the notes and changing the length of the notes, and you decided, well, I don't really need the controller 64 data anymore. How would we do it? Well, that would be a view filter thing. I could look for it in the search window, but that's definitely something that would be easier to do in this window. So let's just do it. So I'll come down here, and we can get rid of pitch bend. We're going to look at here, automation and controllers. It's going to show me all the controllers of every type, right? Mod, expression, Con64, and panning, and so on and so forth. And it's also going to show host automation as well, by the way. So when it says automation and controllers, it's both MIDI CCs and host automation. So I only want to see, and you'll see here, where it says controllers, other. See, it doesn't publish in the list here, which is interesting. I don't know what these gaps are, but I'll just say, well, take me straight to controller 64, hit OK. Are there any 64s in there? There are. And so now what I want to highlight those. And again, if I searched for those, I could go in and change them. But in this particular, I could actually search on a criteria of 64. You know, what was the level of the 64? What were the durations of the 64? But in this case, I could just say, well, you know, I don't need these, so I'll just select all, delete, we'll go back. One more type. I want you guys to see here. Let me set the back to everything for a minute. I want you guys to see that, you know, and this is something that you'll do. You'll be in the mixing board looking at a combination of MIDI and audio tracks, and you'll take a snapshot. Pretty common thing to do, right? You're working and you decide, well, you know, I'm kind of at a point in the project where I think this is pretty set. I'm going to want to do some automation though. I need to take a snapshot. So you take a snapshot, and with MIDI data, you're going to get track mute. And maybe, you know, it's funny. I don't usually like to look at track mute data. If I go into the MIDI tracks here, look at the bottom here. I've got my mute automation for MIDI. Well, I don't really want to look at it. It's just yet another, it's like sort of like visual noise for me. So we'll go back into the tracks window. I'll just use, could I use search? I could use search, but I can use view filter even more quickly. So let's do it. Command F. I'll come in here and I'll say, I'm going to option click on automation and controllers. I'm only going to select internal MIDI track mute. So now it's going to show me all the MIDI track mutes. I definitely don't want these guys. I'll select all, delete, go back, and then we'll just set them all. So everything's back to being visible. So again, remember, one big distinction, view filter grabs the raw data itself of a lot of variety of types, but you can't go into the very specific parameters of a type, like the pitch range, the velocity, and so on and so forth. That's where search is going to give us a deeper layer. So, by the way, quick side note, now that we're going to switch over into that, I want to take a minute to talk about just markers, just a quick thing, a quick side note. And yes, we can look at markers specifically. And here, if I option click on just the markers, I can isolate those. But here's what I want to show you. Because as you're working, and by the way, my markers up here, if you look at the numbers in the markers, these are just bars. And sometimes that's kind of interesting in a way. It's not that you can't see them here, but sometimes it's useful when you're in a project. You can just see the bar numbers as markers. But as you're playing, look at my markers window up here. They're sloppy. I just sort of did them on the fly. Because remember, if I go up to bar 37 and I hit play, and I drop a marker on the fly, watch, I'll hit play. And by the way, in my world, Control M will drop a marker and let me name it. So let me hit play. So you can see here that I dropped this marker in around bar 38. I did it on the fly, so it wasn't perfect, right? But I want to show you guys a quick little trick, which is just quantizing your markers. You know, because we're working that way. Sometimes you'll park yourself somewhere. Let's say, hey, I'm going to park at bar 42, and I'm going to add a marker there specifically. And then obviously it's a very clean downbeat. But sometimes you're just rolling and you're adding markers, and after the fact you want to come in here and, you know, I want to tidy these up by having to click in here and isolate these. And let me just give this one the name bar 38 just to be consistent. All I have to do, by the way, is in the markers window itself. Remember, the shortcut on a Mac is Shift K is the markers window. If I select all and I go up to quantize, in DP, you open up the custom editor. You know, usually I close the custom editor. I like a very small, sort of more compact quantize window where, you know, we're in here all the time. Hey, eighth notes, do I want to have sensitivity, swing, triplets, and so on and so forth? I open up the custom editor and I'm going to quantize. In this case, I want to quantize the markers. So I will do that. So let's just option click on markers, custom editor, and let's make them quarter notes. And now look, we've quantized the markers. And so that's an easy little trick that comes in handy, especially if you're working and dropping them in on the fly. Let's just do it again. If I undo and I go into markers, I select all, I go to Command 0, quantize, custom editor, and I can leave the other parameters. There's nothing really going on here because remember, I've highlighted and I focused the markers window, so there would be no real harm necessarily in keeping other parameters. But sometimes it's just smart to say, option click on markers, pick your value, apply. And so now we have nice clean markers on the downbeat. So that's just a sort of a step aside from what we're doing today. I thought, well, let's talk about it. And so let's continue on our way. Let's get over into search. So remember, under the edit menu, we'll go into new search, and you guys can see Control S. Control S, we'll be doing that a lot today. Nice thing about Control S, by the way, is Control S, if you haven't used the window, opens up a new search. But if there is a search window out there and you're working on it and it drops behind, Control S won't create a new one. It will bring forward the active one. So that's something nice that, just remember it's going to bring the window forward. So that's a good thing. So like we talked about, search will give us a deeper layer to get into. So let's look at it here. So let's talk about, obviously we have a couple of important parameters, and let's just isolate these for a minute. Obviously time, when we're searching, is a question of, where and, what's the duration and what is the time frame of what we're going to actually select. And of course we can come in here, and if we plus, we get to choose all time, which is of course your entire timeline. And so you'll see me doing a lot of all times because it's just everything in the project. And by the way, quick jump down here into search and all sequences. When you're performing searches, you can do them for chunks specifically or everything in all chunks, which is kind of interesting in a way. If you had, let's say as you're working, you've duplicated this entire project, you've created a chunk and you've duplicated it so you have a sort of a copy of it. And you were doing things that you thought were going to apply to the other, you could actually hit search in all sequences. Although in a way, it might even just be easier to just finish the work in this one and then just create a new duplicate. But it's up to you. But that is something that you might actually do a search across multiple chunks. So a time, we're going to talk about metric grid. Metric grid is searching and giving it a criteria based on, syncopation. Hey, I want to select, and this is a very useful thing, and we're going to talk about this in a creative way. Hey, I want to select half notes. I want how many half notes? Well, and you can get to say how many grid points and so on and so forth. So metric grid is something we're going to use. Value is kind of interesting. You can set a range and say, and you guys can see here, hey, from bar 1 to bar 9, bar 1, to beat 5 of bar 1. There's something interesting you guys can do here. It says base settings on the current selection. So if we go into, let's say, the sequence editor, and let's just use the I-beam tool to make a selection, and we go back into search, and you'll see here that if I say base settings on the current selection, it's taken this into consideration. So now it says it shows these as dots, but in fact, I've defined the actual time range based on the selection. It's not something I use that often, to be honest with you. I'm kind of a manual person when it comes to, either selecting all or metric grid or value. Selection range is certainly really useful. And that's another thing where you come in here and let's say you're showing just the boom channel and you select all. And then you go up to the search window and now you're going to use selection range. Because it is important, by the way, to think about what is showing and what is selected when you're searching. So that's kind of an important thing. Are you showing the entire tracks window? Are you showing one specific track in the sequence editor? So be aware of that. And then of course you have things like, hey, where's the counter? I have the counter at bar 9. Well, I want to get everything from bar 9 to the end, or I want to get everything from the beginning up to bar 9. And so you can use those as well. Not something I do that often, but you can certainly do it. So now you're thinking in time, you're making a selection. Now, what are you going to do with that sense of time? What are you searching for? What type of data? And so we can actually plus in a type. And so you can say, I want notes. What kind of notes? I want to choose very specific pitches. I want to choose a pitch value up within a particular range. So I'm going to show you some practical searches that we're going to actually use. Now, it's interesting. I want you guys to see that you see how we're plussing in various parameters. Well, there are groups. So this is interesting. So let's say, for instance, in the case of time, we're going to say all time. Now, I want you guys to see that when we actually we can choose a group. So here's something interesting about a group. A group will put multiple types of search criteria in one, treat it as one element. But what's interesting about a group is that it will let me actually create some logic when it comes to searching. And I'll give you sort of an example of it. Let's say you wanted to search for a note above or below a certain range. Well, what's nice is, you have the choice of saying that they must match, meaning that in some cases you want, if a note lives above or below the range of an instrument, you can tell it that it may match. So obviously sometimes a note that you're looking for above or below a range, it can't exist both above and below. So you can choose may match, which means that you'll be able to search for given events. And that's the benefit of a group. The benefit of a group is that you can define criteria and you can just say whether it must or may match. And that will help you differentiate. It's not, and I don't always use groups. And sometimes it depends on what you're kind of searching for to use those kinds of groups. So just remember, if you have certain notes above or you're doing something that requires it to must match or may match, you have that choice. And so we set our time, we're picking our value, and we can actually minimize this and we can come in here. What can we choose when it comes to searching for events? Lots and lots of different types, key change, meter change, tempo change, and see all these different types of data. And you'll see here event type. So let's talk about when you would use event type. If I go down to controller, okay, I can say, oh, the controller is number 1. I'm searching for mod wheel. But what's interesting is if I go up here to event type and I say choose, and now I go down in here, I can be very specific and I can say, hey, not just controller 1, I want all of these, you can be very specific. You can add a list of controllers that you want to search for. So that's where, when given the choice, choose event type, it'll open up, looks a lot like the view filter, right? Pick the parameters that you want to have as a part of, in this particular case, all sorts of different interesting parameters that can be chosen here as event type. A sense of time, a type of event, and of course, the idea, of course, with all of this is that we can just continuously add and refocus and update and narrow down the parameters of our search, whether with a sense of time or the type of event. And we can just keep adding the values that we want to narrow our search. And remember that we can also use the brackets, which are the groups. And so that's where you can get into this. Now, and of course, down below, when you decide what you're going to, where it lives and what type of data it is, what do you want to do with it? Well, typically, 90% of the time for me, I want to actually just create a selection based on it. So it'll create a new selection. So I've made this selection on my booms. I've picked the attributes that I want for the search. I hit search, and it's going to give me a new selection. What can I do with the selection? Well, geez, you can do anything with the selection, right? You can delete, you can transpose, you can change durations, you can insert controller data. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do with selected data in DP, right? So that's what search is doing. It's giving you the results that you want so that you can, delete them or modify them, copy, paste them, edit them, and so on and so forth. And so you can see that you can, when you create a selection, you can create a subset of a selection. You can add to selections. And there's also something here I'll show you, it's interesting, which is displaying the results in a search window, which also comes in handy. Sometimes you'll be working with somebody who might say, hey, I want to see a particular set of meter changes, and you can actually print the results. So that's something that we'll actually talk about. Cool. So that's sort of laying the groundwork. And let's just look here real quick for a minute here down under the edit menu. And you can see in this window that we have the ability to do a new search. Of course, search again will just rerun the last search. And you can see up here that as you start using presets, you can see that this is like presets in virtual instruments in DP, where you can go to the next preset. Hey, show me the next preset, or show me the previous, and you can move up and down here. So these are the ones that I'm going to show you. I'm going to share with you guys later. I'll send you a link to the ones that I've created, and you can apply these. So that's something I want you guys to see. So let's just spend some time, getting into some useful searches. Hopefully you'll find these useful searches. So let's look in this project for muted MIDI notes. So we'll go in here to the piano part. So in my piano, and let's just see here, we're in the sequence editor. We can look in the MIDI editor, although it's fine, we can do it in here. So there's a section in my tune. Yeah, let's look in the MIDI editor. I tend to like to look at the MIDI tracks in the MIDI editor, but everybody's different. If I need to reference audio, then I'll obviously look at it in the sequence editor. So in this composition, I was playing with the idea of putting this upper piano part sort of like tenths kind of above. And I thought, it's getting in the way of all these string parts. So I muted it. Now, at the end of the project, sometimes just house cleaning, housekeeping, you may want to delete that data, and I just want you guys to see that, we can easily get rid of it, and something you can easily do with the search window. So let's just do it together. I can keep this, in fact, I can select all because the piano track is the only thing in view. And we're going to create these searches together on the fly, Control S. And so we're just going to choose selection range, and we're going to choose event type, and we're going to choose notes that are display only notes. So as I search, display only notes, they don't play. They're not normal notes. They're displaying, but they're not playing. So they're a unique category. So now that I have those, so this is interesting, by the way, when it comes to search. Now, you've finished your search. It's created a new selection. Now, this window is still in focus. If I hit the delete key, nothing happens. So what you kind of have to do is just carefully, I think, click above the data area. It keeps your selection. If you're not careful, you click somewhere and you've lost your selection. So just remember that. We're going to go back, and you guys can see here under search. It's still there. And now I can say, no, give it back to me, please. I want that search. Oh, it was based on selection range. So that's where it got that error. So I'll reselect, go back. I've got it set to notes, display only, click search. It shows me those notes. I click forward. I say bye, delete those tracks, copy, and so on and so forth. So let's add to that. So that's definitely a practical thing that you might do, is select the notes that are muted in your project. Now, we could do it across the entire project. Let's do that because we're here. So now I'm not going to select anything because I'm going to choose all time. Control S, and I'm going to set this back to all time. And I'm going to choose notes, display only, search please. And look, you can see the piano notes that are selected. And so something interesting that I want you guys to think about is using the view filter at the same time as using the search window. Because look at the sort of madness that is this, although obviously we can see that those notes are selected. What if we went now over to view filter and we said, well, let's just show the notes, and we're going to show these kinds of notes. And let me again do this. So we're going to show all of these. We're going to hide the controller data. And I want you guys to see that we're looking at normal on velocity notes. And we want to playback only normal articulations. And so now that we're using the view filter, if I come back, and now I'm going to select, go back to the search. And so now this is just less visual noise, right? The view filter is taking away everything but the notes. It's showing me both the display, the normal notes, and the display only notes. And yet, so I'm using a combination. The view filter is helping me take away all the extra data so that now I can get to the point where I can highlight those. Remember, I click the window to bring it forward. I hit delete. And so that's interesting to use both at the same time. So that's practical, right? That's something you would definitely want to use. So what about a range? So this is interesting. Let's show kind of the beauty and the strength of the search window. If we go into the MIDI editor, and for the piano, which is there, we'll go out here a little ways. Let's deselect. Now look, if you look here, D3 to E3, and there's an F here. There's an F natural in one of the, there's an F natural. So let's go back to the search window. And we've got it set to all time. Let's set it back here to, yeah, we can leave it all time. At the bottom, let's set a range for the mutes. We're going to go up plus. Now it says notes, pitch value is in a range. Let's do, how about E2 to D3. Let's try it. Now, I'm going to hit search. Now, this is interesting, right? When you do this search, you go, it's broken, it's not doing it. No, it says it's set to may match. Well, if I set it to must match and I research, now it will actually follow the rule to the exact setting that I had set up. I didn't say it may match. I said it must match. And in this case, I'm saying, find me the notes that are display only, which is muted. And of those notes, I want to do a particular pitch range, and you must follow that, please. And I select those. And now I'm getting the muted notes for only that particular range. So again, there's no way you can do that with the view filter. You can look at the muted notes in the view filter, but you can't set a range. Now, it's interesting. What else could I do with that? I could plus it and say, based on a velocity. So you can really narrow it all the way down. Now, I don't want to go off the deep end, but I want you guys to see. Now, of course, what's a nice thing that you could do is, now maybe that's very specific. I could minus that, but I would want to save this potentially. And so I could come up here and say, well, and this is what I've done in here, is I've saved a whole bunch of different ones. And so you would just title this. You could say, well, let's see. Don't click on new, by the way. It will blow up your current setting. Just go in and say save. And if a name like this could be something real easy, it could just be something like all time muted MIDI notes. That's it. And then now it's in there. And of course, what's nice is that you'll see it goes to the very, very bottom. And we can go into edit searches. And of course, we can delete it. Or more importantly, we can assign it a key command. Well, that's practical. Something that, it's not like you're going to be reaching for those muted MIDI notes every day that it would deserve necessarily a key command. But that's the idea, that you certainly could set it up. But you could also manage the clean up the stuff that you don't need to look at. So we'll just hit done. And in this window, by the way, we can just say that you can edit the searches. You can restore the factory defaults if you wanted to. And we're going to talk about where those files are stored as well. So we'll get into that. Okay, so let's do muted audio. And I know today is a little drier. I hope you guys are staying with me on this. We'll get into some creative uses of search here in just a minute. So stay with me here. Let's go over to the sequence editor. And I want you guys to see I have audio tracks. And so let's just zoom out here a little bit. And let's bring back, by the way, from our view filter, everybody. I want to see everybody. Save. Okay, so it's useful and practical to want to eliminate audio that's muted. How do we do that? That's not a problem. That's an easy one to do. Let's go into search. And you can see that since I had closed the window, Control S brought up a clean slate. And so no problem. That's fast. All time, please. What do we want? We want sound bites. We want muted sound bites. We want muted sound bites is muted. That's what I want. Okay, I want to hit search. Oh, cool. Perfect. I've got those highlighted. Now it's interesting. I could delete those. I could byte gain those. They're selected, right? It would be more practical. Now remember, if I roughhouse and push forward, I might lose my selection. So I just click forward, delete. So that's something we can undo. And so again, that's an easy thing to do, right? Muted MIDI notes, muted sound bites. I did that specifically for all time because in this window, and we go back to that same search, all time, let's look for them. There they are. They're selected. Delete those. I don't need those. And it is kind of cool. Like you've done a save as, right? You've delivered the project. You're doing a little cleaning up, and you thought, you know what? Let's just get rid of that stuff because you have a save as version, and you've just been able to do that. And of course, what's interesting is we could come in here. What else could we do with sound bites? Well, if we plus in, and we could say may or must match, and we could say, well, let's see here, sound bites. Well, what else can we do with those? I guess we could say, let's go into sound bites. And so we definitely want the muted ones, but we also want the ones based on a duration. So that's kind of interesting, right? Muted sound bites of a certain duration. And so this is where the search window becomes quite powerful. Now, I thought of something interesting. I wanted you guys to see what I can do with transpose. Transposing audio. I can use search to deal with that. So let's go into the sequence editor. We're looking at both of my audio tracks. The rest of these tracks are MIDI. We're just going to look at the audio tracks. Now, if I switch holding Option to the pitch layer, and I zoom in, Control drag, I want you guys to see that this particular algorithm is set to none. This is set to ZTX format corrected. Okay. Well, I can use that in my search. Control S. And so let's just set this all here to all time, pit, and we'll go back down into sound bites. Now, it's interesting. I want to go into transpose preference. Remember, every soundbite in Digital Performer gives you the choice of what algorithm you want to use. Do you want to use Pure DSP, ZTX, do you want to use none? So right now I want to search for the ones that are ZTX. And so when I search, it's found this. If I zoom out, and again, I'm going to come forward here a little bit. Now what's interesting is, look over here on the right. Well, I've got the sound file information showing, and I can come down here and say, well, you know what? I'd like to switch that to ZTX standard. So, you know, there's lots of ways to do that. But remember, if you've got a whole bunch of different sound bites and you want to be able to come in here and be able to isolate and search for the ones based on a particular preference, you know, a pitch preference, you can find those and you can swap those out with sound file information. So again, kind of practical, kind of tweaky, but definitely practical. And it's interesting. I mean, once you start really looking at that, you go, wow, like search is pretty deep.
Matt, quick question while you're there. Did that change it for just symbol number 5, or did it change it for all the current selection?
In that particular case, it's just symbol number 5. Yep. And then that's a good point that he brings up. You know, I can go through here. When I select the first one, the first thing that my search, it will show up in the sound file editor. So it's kind of smart that way. The first in the list that meet that requirement is the one that I can then select. So let's keep going, because we're going to get to some creative stuff here.
Matt, 2 questions though that apply to what you were just talking about, if that's cool. One, is there a shortcut to go back to showing all instead of going into the search filter?
Showing all.
In other words, once you're done searching, letting go of what your search has located, I think is the concept.
Oh, yeah. You know what's nice is on a Mac, Command D will deselect all.
Right.
You know, in other words, just to blow off what's selected. Yeah, I mean, you can just click out of the range. I think that's sort of maybe the best way, or deselect all.
Cool. And the second question is with regard to the way you just changed the ZTX for the soundbite you'd selected. Mm-hmm. Is there a command to bulk change that algorithm, meaning across all of them?
Yeah.
Many of them?
Yeah, what's nice is because they're selected, as I hold Option and switched one of those selected, they'll switch to the new. So that is, and actually in a way that sort of goes back to what Glenn was talking about. Hey, I see the one on the list in the sound file editor, I switch it. But hey, the ones that I wanted are selected. All the no DSP or all the pure DSPs are selected. I hold Option, switch one, boom, they're all selected. But remember, to get to that point, you know, I may have to go through there and just try to command select all these different things. No, search. Search says, give me all those of a particular type. So you guys can see that, again, tweaky but useful stuff. I want to show you guys in here also. So let's zoom out here. Let's actually look at, let me go back to soundbite level here, and we'll zoom out on the audio. These are basically like symbols and hits, guys, that I use on this project. And so if I come in here and go into search, now look, all time soundbite, I want to choose a specific, I want to search for one specific soundbite. This might be useful. You've got some interesting hit, some interesting sound that you want to just isolate. And for some reason, you've got such a big project. It's, you know, 600 bars into your timeline on this epic 25-minute symphony you've written or something, right? And you come in here and say, well, no, I want to search for symbol 12, please. Oh, there he is. There's symbol 12. What do I want to do with that? Well, let me just click forward here. I just want to completely come in here and do a crossfade on that. I noticed that I heard a little sound. So let me actually go back to equal power. Let's bump this up to 75, 75, apply. Moving on. And so there it is. There's another useful thing with search, is searching for a very specific file. Look what else you can do in soundbite. Show me sampling rate, muted, tempo, transpose, and so on and so forth, duration, number of channels. If you're mixing up surround channels, quad channels, 7/1 channels, and stereo files, hey, I want to find all of the 7/1 channels. That's pretty easy to find based on your track, but you get the idea. Cool. So let's look now for, I want to show you guys another practical thing, which is I want the notes from a MIDI track, but not the controller data, because I want to be able to copy the notes to another track, but I don't want the data to go with it. Let's do that. Let's go over here to my solo cello, and let's look at it in the MIDI editor, actually. Solo cello. You guys can see it comes in here at the beginning. So I've got this little lead section. Let's hear it for a second. So there's a little bit of automation here in volume. You guys can see down below the blue is the volume controller data. So I want the notes. I don't want the controller data. I could use the view filter, but I want to use the actual, I may actually add more parameters to the search. So what do I do here? Well, let's just use the I-beam. Let's just use the I-beam. Or, I can just select all. That's okay. Or, obviously it's a question of what do you want? Do you want just the first section? Do you want the entire section? Well, we can just I-beam the first few bars. Now, go back to search. And we're just going to do based on selection range. I want you guys to get comfortable with this window, so I'm going to perform the searches here. I want the notes, and in this particular case, I'm just going to set the range really large. Say from C1 to, C5 definitely covers it. Search, please. Look, it's got the notes, but it doesn't have the controller data. Oh, perfect. So what can I do? Now watch, click forward, copy. Okay. We're going to go over here. I'm going to add a MIDI track. Here's the MIDI track. We're going to come in here. We're going to select paste. We're going to nudge this over. There's no controller data down below, but I have the notes because that was a very simple test, simple trick within the search window. So let me undo, and we'll just delete the MIDI track. And we'll go back into MIDI editor and we'll look again at the solo cello. Let's do the opposite of that. And this is, again, something that you might want to do is, no, I want the controller data. I don't want the notes. Okay. Let's just select all in this case. Go back. Now, I've got my search, but I want to be able to pick. Now, do we pick all controllers? Maybe we pick all controllers. Why don't we go to event type? If we go to event type and choose, and we can say, give me all of the automation controllers. Now remember, because it's based on selection, it's not going to do the entire project. It's just going to do the one selected track. I hit search and look down below. I've got that data. I click forward, I copy it, I paste it. I delete it. So that's something useful that you may use. I want to get just the notes. I want to get just the controller data. And so it's something you may end up using. Let's go over to notes within a velocity range. I want you guys to see searching for notes in a velocity range. Let's go over to snare. So I have a snare track here, and it starts off. Now you guys can see based on the color of these tracks here, that the lighter the color, the lighter the velocity, the lower the velocity. So let's do a search, and let's just select all in the snare track, go back, and good, we have my last search here. Selection range, yeah, I want that. And this time though, we want to actually go back into notes. So we'll come out of notes. Now pitches is interesting, but we want to actually choose velocities. And we want to pick a range. Now, sometimes when you're looking at this, let's just let this fall behind here. Look down below. I'm going to switch my volume over to on velocities. And so you guys can see that I've got the flags here. And I go, oh, that first snare is way down there, 25, 28-ish, somewhere in there. And then we have various velocity ranges. So why don't we just pick up the ones that are really low? So we'll go back into search and say, hey, on velocity within a range, 0 to how about maybe 40? Let's get those. Oh, and let me actually, it's based on selection range, I lost my selection, see? So sometimes you do have to kind of think about that. That's where all time comes in, but I don't mind doing that and going back and saying search. So remember, if you get the little error and you had it set to selection range, just make sure that you go back and get your selection, do your selection, whether you grab it, you I-beam tool it, you select all, isolating a track. It could be multiple tracks. It doesn't have to be one track. It can be anything that's a selection. What am I looking for? On velocities below from 0 to 40. Grab those, please. Come forward, click out of the window, go to my V for velocity. Oh, I want to pick those up. Let's add 20 to that, and so on and so forth. So practical, useful. Across an entire piece, let's say, seriously, for whatever reason, you've done a very unique composition where the low is too low in the velocities. And remember, with sample libraries, velocities are triggering very specific samples. So I could literally go back into this window and say all time, find everything in the composition. That's from 0 to 40. All of these. Now I've taken my selection and I want to raise them all. So again, always be thinking about whether it's a selection or it's all time, and what are you searching for? And we can remember, we can just add to it. We could say, well, okay, no, it's from 0 to 40, but how about also now within a particular pitch range? In fact, we could do that. We could easily do that. We could say, okay, let's, of everything that's currently selected, let's actually set the range here. The low notes, I want the C0s, which there's going to be nothing really going on down there, to C2s. So I want the really low velocities and I want the really low notes, please. Does anything meet that? Apparently these do. These must be low. These are low notes. And let me also make sure that they must match. So when I said may match, it didn't affect because in that particular case, one of the two search criteria was met. When I said must, no, they must be low, and they must be low in velocity and low in pitch. And sure enough, this one guy right here, let's just look at him. Let me just go into the MIDI editor and see what it actually came up with. Look at the velocity is very, very low, and the pitch is down here at C2. So it found that. What do we do with the results? Well, I want to change it up an octave. Now, in this particular case, the temp roll is not going to sound correctly. That's a very unique situation, which brings up one other point, by the way, that you can turn on transpose exclude. So in a situation where I don't want to transpose an element, I can just turn that on here. And as I'm making a bunch of searches and doing a bunch of transpositions, it's ignoring the ones that are transpose exempt. A couple other ones real quick. Let's look at tempo changes and meter changes. This is, again, thinking for those who are composing filmed scores and things like that. Let's go into the MIDI editor and let's look at the top for conductor. And so what do we have in the conductor track? Let's go back to bar 1. A 6-4-4-4, 6-4-4-4, and let's go out here. And look, I've got a retardando here at bar 50. Let's just hear it. Okay, pretty substantial. I like it. Now, remember when you're looking at the data here, watch what, if I go over here to the left side, I click and drag to magnify. And I go, oh, cool, I can see that better. Thank you for that. Easier on the eyes. I'll go out to bar 50-ish, and I'm looking at this going, now how long would it take me to actually modify this with my hand, with my various tools? But that's not really the point. I want you guys to see that search could let me do something unique with this. Let's go back to Control S. And we'll do all time. That's fine, because remember, with conductor track, information like events pertaining to tempo, that's not going to be a problem in other tracks. That's very unique to the conductor track. So we're going to say all, and we're going to just reset this here. What are we going to reset it to? Tempo change. What are we going to set the tempo change to? Well, let's see. How about, let's see, what did I have here in my, how about a tempo change between, let's see, how about 80, 70, and 85? Let's find those. Search, please. Oh, it found those events. Those are all the events that are met that are tempo changes between that range of tempos. So now I click forward. And what do I do with it? Well, I go up to region, and now I can scale the tempos. Well, what are we going to do with that? Are we going to add to it? No, I want to actually limit the range. I picked, remember when I searched, I went from 70 to 88. Now I'm going to limit the range from 75 to 88. And when I apply, it's going to make it less severe. Now, would I go through that process doing search? In a situation where, remember, you're looking at sort of the macro view, and you've got all these different things going on. This composition, this project has all sorts of tempo changes here and there and everywhere. And you're able to actually go into search and say, no, I want to find a range of tempos, and I want to be able to select those to go up now into region and be able to scale those tempos. So how about meter changes? Meter changes. That's interesting. Let's try it. Okay, so let's say you're doing this piece and it's just set to quarter notes. And for some reason, you've got some 6/4 bars. Everything has the same pulse. It's the same pulse, but you have meter changes. And now you're like, let's just ditch the meter changes. Let's just get rid of them. I think we have a pulse. I don't even really care what the actual dividers are. As long as we have our sense of time, we're good to go. And so we're just going to do that in here. You guys know, go back into search. What are we looking for? We'll do it quickly, all time. And what are we looking for? We're looking for meter changes. We want to find all the 6/4 meter changes. So, okay, let's do it. Search. And so we're going to go back here to the beginning, and let's zoom in a little bit here, and we'll go back to our search. All-time meter changes value is search. So now look, they're blue, they're highlighted, and again, 600 bars of your epic symphony, and you've got all these different meter changes, and you decide, well, I'm going to shift those. Well, I don't think I want to shift them necessarily. I'll just delete them. Again, we have our pulse, so since they're selected, I'll just delete those. I'll just undo. So, again, searching for tempo changes, searching for meter changes. Here's what I was going to tell you about. If I look at these 6/4 bars, we go back into search. Now watch this. We haven't talked about this yet. I want to, at the bottom for action, let's display them in the search results window. So let's search. Oh, here they are. Oh, this is good. So somebody says on your production team says, believe it or not, I need to know those in advance. I'm building something. I'm building a set of videos or streamers or whatever. And so you say, okay, that's whatever you need, Phil. You got it. So I'm going to save this for you. And I'm just going to put it on my desktop. And I'm sending it right over. And we go, okay, here it is. Oh, cool. So there's a 6/4 at bar 1, there's a 6/4 at bar 7, there's a 6/4 bar at bar 30. Hey, quick side note, I did my side note step out for quantizing markers. I want to do a side step out for event list. What are we going to do with it? We're going to go over here into conductor, Shift E, and what are we going to look at? Well, I don't need to see key changes. I don't need to see markers. I want to show you guys in this window, we're going to get rid of punches and flutters and so on and so forth. We don't need all this stuff. What we do want in this click changes, I want to see two things. I want to see all the tempo changes. I want to see all the meter changes. Now, this window is active. I go to print and I say save a PDF. Put it on the desktop, please. There it is. Hide. There's the event list for this project. This is great. I mean, wow. Okay, look. Horror one, but seriously, you're not even thinking of the music. You're looking at this later on that night. You're kind of preparing your notes for tomorrow's session. You've booked a studio in Prague, and now you're going, okay, so B189 or speeding up. This is a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing that you could narrow that down very specifically in DP and print the window and be able to send that off to somebody. The music editor needs to know those timings. Perfect. Love that. Great. Okay. Excellent. Now, well, here's another one that I thought would be kind of interesting in a way. It might come in handy once in a blue moon, which is go back to search. Back to search. I want to see all time. And I want to show, let's see, pitch. Let's see, notes. Choose the pitches. I want to select in my project all of the E naturals. Okay. Okay, why? I don't know. This is a funny thing, right? Let's say you wrote a piece in the key of C major, and you're going to take all the major thirds in your entire composition, all the way up to, let's say, C6. Okay. I want you to select in this composition every person that's playing an E natural. Go. There they all are. Now, what could I do with those? Well, I click forward. And I go up to transpose and I say, okay, I want to take all of those E naturals up a minor third, apply. Whoa, what does it sound like? It kind of definitely changes my composition. At one point I was going to do kind of a Phrygian thing and I thought, no, don't scare them. That's not going to work. But the idea, of course, is wow. I'm taking all these clusters of notes. I'm saving a preset of those. I want to take every major third in this composition down a minor third and do a minor version, sort of a minor major scale sort of interpretation of this. Could I do it with transpose? I could. Can I do it with search? Yeah, probably even faster. Again, an obtuse thing that you may do, but that's what I wanted to do. Oh, volume into decibel range. Before we switch to the MIDI creative metric grid, let's do one more, because this is, again, useful. Let's say we go into booms, go into sequence editor. Let's look at volume automation. There's my volume automation. Okay. I go to search, and I say, oh, you know what? Let's do it based on all time. Yeah, what the heck? We'll do it on all time. What are we going to look at? Audio volume. So this obviously meets, but the point I'm making in this, and I'm being maybe a little too quick about this, I want to make sure there's time for questions, is that you can search for audio volume in any track of a particular range, decibel range. And so as you as you select those that meet the actual search parameters, then you can obviously go up and say that you want to change the continuous data. I want to elevate those by a certain amount. I've selected those particular audio volume points that are in a particular decibel range, and I want to add to those. So tweaky and interesting. Let's go over to something a little bit more creative, which is changing the rhythm. So let's go over into, I think I have a part here, play toms. Let's look at it in the MIDI window, play toms. What's it doing? I think it's out around bar 44. Here's what it sounds like. Let's hear it. So let's just, by the way, since this window, this is forward, I'll hit solo. So a pretty boring little part there from play, and I'm going to select all, and we're going to go in to the search window, and we're going to choose metric grid. And by the way, I'm not even going to worry about the event types. I'm going to minus the event. I just want a sense of time. What do I want? Well, these are 16th notes. So let's go a little slow here. What we're doing is I want to search for a different rhythmic pattern to apply to these 16th notes. So I'm choosing in search metric grid at the top, and I'm going to choose 16ths. And how many do I want? Now, here's something interesting. I'm going to choose 9, because then what's interesting about it is that it's going to go over the bar, and it's going to create some interesting rhythmic things. So check this out. 1 E and 2 E and Let's select those. 9 16th notes. And this, the ones that are highlighted are the ones that will be selected. There they are. 1 E and 2 E and ba ba ba. Now, don't lose your selection. Come forward. Go to V for velocity, and I want to actually set the ones that are selected up to 105. Yeah, let's hear it. And let's hear it just isolated. Now, it's really cranking, but let's hear it in context. It's pretty cool. I just think it's all loud now. But I can just, after the fact, now I go back and I say, hey, you're all great. You're wonderful. But I need like 50% of you, please. Nope, too far. Too far. We'll go back to V and say 80%. Another 80. So totally useful to take short strings, percussion elements. You played it in a certain way. Now, one of the tricks that I did in advance, kind of full disclosure, is I played it in and it had some velocity variation to it. But what you do when you know you're going to do some of these kinds of things is you do a flat line. In other words, you come in here and you say, hey, you're all 60s. You're all 60s. So there's no love there. It's all even. But when you do your search and you say metric grid and you pick the value and you make your selection, and in this case, 16th notes with this over the bar, 9 of them, and hit search, then you go back to velocity and you pick up the ones that are highlighted. And the last time I went too far, let's try 90s. Apply. 44. And then remember, this isn't a Tom soloed composition here, so we're going to scale And I think maybe, how about 70%? Let's hear that. I mean, it's still a little too pronounced, but you guys get the idea. I want you to be able to hear that. So metric grid is a musical way to use search. It's not about meter changes and decibel ranges and muted notes. It's about rhythmic figures. And that's such a cool thing. And by the way, if I go over here into the short, so we'll leave this as it is. Let's go into the cello staccato here for a second. Now, check this out. I'm going to select all, and let's just, by the way, we'll solo. Here's the cello. I'm going to hit the solo key. Put on the click. Dot, 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 dot. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to go in. This time we're actually going to use one of my presets that I think that you guys are going to get. And I'm going to say eighth note, eighth accents. Now, here's something interesting. Okay, so I'm going to choose eighth notes, 8 of them. 1, bop, bop, bop. So here you go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and those are the accents that I want. But here's something interesting. I added to the parameters a particular range. So when I search, I'm only doing the lower notes. So how cool is that? With doing metric grid, you're going to create accents for MIDI within a particular range. You don't want to affect all the notes. So let's just try it. Now that I've got my selection, which are the lower two, based on, look, bop, bop, these are selected. I come forward, I go to V, I set those, or add, I'll add 100s for those. Let's hear it soloed. Actually, you know what? Let me add more to those. Let's actually, well, we can reset the ones that are selected. Let's go to 110. Let's make them bite a little harder. And let's just hear it in context. Unsolo. And Mr. Click goes bye-bye. John, 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 John. And you can definitely hear that in the piece. Those are the figures that you want the cellos to dig in on. And you didn't do it when you wrote the piece. And can you do it later? Sure, I can do it later based on a rhythmic figure, based on a metric grid, based on a range of the instruments, based on velocities. And again, search is so interesting that way. Now, let's do digital audio. And that's where it's like, what? You can do search with digital audio? Well, yeah, earlier we did sound bites. No, let's do rhythmic things with digital audio. So we're going to go down to a different chunk for that. We're going to go into one here. It's a little cue called Fear, which is kind of a trailer that I did years ago for a company. Let's just hear a bar or two of that. It's like, oh, are we on it? Oh, no problem. We'll switch it to Fear here at the top. Let's just hear a second of it. You know, it just has that sort of, kind of vibe to it. Now, high perk. This is all digital audio, by the way. And we're going to go, it's interesting, you guys see these cuts in here. I'm working with the producer on this, and he's just like, it's too long, cut this, cut that, cut this. And so I'm just making these broad stroke cuts across the sequence, doing a save as, and I go into the sequence editor, and let's just look here. Let's just make sure we're on the right, let's just look at all the audio tracks here, except we don't need to look at the masters. Let's just resize and look at the audio tracks here so you guys can see. Just making big, broad cuts and doing crossfades, and let's just hear that seam here. See, they were two sections that were completely different. And so that worked really well. We did a big crossfade across those, and it just kind of had this nice kind of morphing kind of sound to it. But that's not really what the lesson is. Let's look at high perk. High perk. And I made a marker. Where's my marker? Well, here it is, high perk. Let's click on the marker. There it is. What are we looking at? We're looking at a bunch of 16th notes. Let's solo it. We're going to solo the perk. Nice. It's very wet, by the way. That's not my reverb. That's just whatever I was given, but it is what it is. So I want to change, using that metric grid and search, I want to change and create accents in the audio. How do I do it? Well, step one, make some cuts. Now you guys know this is simple. Up above, I have my edit grid. I have my beat grid. Beat grid. That's the blue guy. And so we're just going to come in here and I'm just going to cut. Because we don't have to go crazy. Let's cut the first one here too. And let's just get some of these guys, and we'll just do enough that you guys can hear the accents. And you guys know that there's an oddity right now. If I drag, it may create more than it should. And so I'm just going to play it safe here and just cut a few bars. Let's see, bar 17. Let's go through at least bar 18. Let's just get a couple of bars. Because remember, this figure happens for the rest. There's nothing really uniquely different about each of these parts. In fact, why don't I just do this? I'll just go back to the edit grid, turn off the beat grid, highlight along the time ruler, and say, how many should I get? Give me, I don't know, give me 6 of those. Okay, that works. So now we're going to actually do our search, and we're bar 16. And so let's do it. Now look at to see how there are some accents in here. So, but I'm just going to kind of ignore the accents. Do I want to come in here and sort of bite gain those down? I could be super type A. If it was a really, really, really important section and be featured in some massive film or record project, you would want to come in here and say, he's a little loud. Let's even these out. But you know what? Let's just go forward. And let me just get rid of this first little phantom piece that we don't need. Delete. All right. So let's select all. Let's go to Control S. What are we going to do? Selection range. Oh, no, we're not going to do selection range. We're going to do metric grid. What am I thinking? 16th notes. How many of them? And maybe we do something that's not so random, although this is such a randomy piece. Yeah, I'm feeling like since it's St. Patrick's Day, I don't know what that means. I'm going to do something that's not a perfect even number. So we'll do 11 16th notes. Now, I don't need notes, so I'm just going to right off the bat, even though I'm kind of concentrating on 2 things at once, I'm just going to minus the event attribute. Although it could be, I could add to that, but I don't really need to in the case of soundbites. So ba 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 da ba ba be ba ba. That's, I don't know why, but that seems to make sense to me. So what's nice, by the way, is notice, guys, I didn't have to deselect. It will update the search on the fly. So now that those are selected, I come out here, and I lost my selection. You see how I have to be careful with that, right? You have to be careful with that. And I'm going to go above. See? Now I go to my N, which is my byte gain, and I make these loud. I'll make them +7 decibels louder. Let's hear it. But even louder. So the ones that are selected, I want to go up to 10 dB. And let's hear it. Let's hear it maybe even on context. I'll unsolo. See if you guys can hear those accents. You can see that it definitely picked the right rhythmic grid values, and I byte gained up those. Do they need, in fact, let's just isolate and see if we need any crossfades on those. Let's just solo them with no click. I don't really hear a need for fades, but just to be, sometimes for an insurance policy, I'll just do 10 milliseconds. And I just added those in. Let's hear it in context. I mean, you hear the accents. I'm not sure it's the world's most musical thing, but you guys get the idea that you've done something that's rhythmic, that's digital audio, live shakers, and you say, is that it? We don't have any dynamics in this. Can I do anything with these? Yes, of course you can. But this time, make sure that you make good cuts so that when you do your grid selection, you get those nice, you get those highlighted, and now what do you do with them? I change the duration of those. I time stretch those. Whatever. I byte gain them up or down. So that kind of concludes today's sort of journey through view filter, quantizing markers, doing various searches of audio, MIDI, muted audio, muted MIDI, and then being able to take the results, save those. So let me put those in the chat so you guys can grab those. And let me tell you where they go. That's kind of an important point. So let's do that.
You mentioned there we're going to be what preference or where they were stored.
Yes, exactly. So we've just did this. This sort of worked, and we can close the project. Now, on my desktop, you guys, I have just basically created an alias to, when you go into your desktop, remember when you hold Option, you go into your user library. When you go into your user library, preferences, and you go into com.motu.digitalperformer, in the com.mo2 digital performer folder that is in your user library preferences, there is something here called search settings. I've basically, zipped this file. I'm going to give it to you, put it in this location. Now take the one that's in there out. And this is an interesting point, by the way, because you can swap these files. There isn't a way currently, without kind of risking ruining the format of these, using like a text editor, to copy the data within these files. So I wouldn't recommend that. In fact, kind of don't do that. But just know that you can have as many as you want stored outside and put them into your preferences folder. And when you open up DP, it will see the current search settings. So keep yours as a backup. You can put mine in. You can't change the name. But when you open up the program after it's been quit, it will use those search settings. And so here is a link. So remember, you're going to get this file. You're going to put it on the desktop of your computer. You're going to open up the com.mo2.digitalperformer folder in your user library preferences. You're going to take your existing settings out. And, or obviously you can just try mine, put mine in and look at them. And remember, they're going to show up in Digital Performer. And when I go to Control S, they'll be at the bottom. And I have quite a few that you guys can check out and use. And they're decently named to where you can kind of hopefully make some use out of those. And so let me put here, I've got a link to Dropbox. And let me copy this and stop the share. And I'll put this right now into the chat. All right, everybody, enjoy your weekend and see you next time.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.